Today's horror story is written by scalyannihilator. A study more ultimatum didn't solve the potatoes crashing downstairs every night problem, and the lodger upstairs, whom they all feared, was beyond reason. My student Diggs lay next to that staircase. Midnight. I stopped writing. Jack walked along the carpeted landing, high above the hard lobby tiles. With a smack against jute, the package thundered down unupholstered oak. I prostrated my face on my palms, listening to his 30-step descent. He dragged the sack to the door opposite, entered, and closed it. Such was my nightly custom over the past year. 6 hours later, I was due to meet Richard, who owns the property. He warned me of Jack before I moved in. "Don't get too inquisitive. Just concentrate on your own affairs. Stay on the ground floor, and you shouldn't have any problems. Let Jack do his own thing." He said little else of interest but for one curious detail. He referred to him as Jack of Hall Manor. The villagers were sullen. I might have been the happiest person around those parts. It amused me to consider being the only miserable soul among the merry would make me happier. No. I slept after midnight, stayed on the ground floor, and paid no heed to the antics upstairs. After a full academic year, I suffered anxiety attacks and bad dreams punctuated my sleep. Alternative digs would be a noisy possibility, of course, but I hoped the next year would be different, so I returned. The nightmares did too. I told Richard about the ultimatum. He knew what I wanted regarding Jack, but wouldn't entertain the idea of engaging, let alone trying to evict him. As a token gesture, he divulged Jack's history, with a positive spin, helping me as much as he dared. I guessed he didn't want to lose more revenue. Tough attracting new tenants nowadays. Great fear betrayed those bulging eyes. Anyone would think we were being overheard somehow. As I returned from that meeting, my senses tingled. The sun had risen but struggled to brighten any of the gray clouds. Dark hiding places lurked everywhere, and dead leaves froze, covering atrocities. Between me and Hall Manor lay a few desolate streets and a graveyard. Only one other person was visible, and he was way up ahead. After 20 minutes, I drew close to the river in its thick early autumn fog. A dragging noise became apparent from up ahead and getting louder as I approached. I entered the graveyard, intending to see the gravestone Richard told me about. Although damaged and weathered, the name Hall Manor remains visible. The fog lifted and an enormous man appeared. Headless, with a spade tied to his back, he dragged a sack full of contents along the ground. His shoulders were much higher than me, and I'm taller than average. He disappeared back into the fog, and the noise ceased. Was that Jack? What's with the spade? What's in the sack? That night, I wrote a letter to my research supervisor. Without Richard's help, there was no point continuing. I tried to make headways through my thesis problems, but what I'd learned about Jack earlier and the man in the graveyard distracted me. Midnight. The mystery package clattered on wood and banged against the wall, landing outside my door. In a fit of curiosity, I rushed over to it as Jack descended the stairs. I crouched, resting my head on the carpet, and peered through the gap underneath. This allowed me to see across the lobby, but something was blocking the view. A hand. Did it look dead? It slid away before I could take a better look. Jack had now stopped walking. There was silence. I estimated he was halfway down the stairs. Or was he? An immense thud shook the door. I scrambled away, the thought of him opening it terrifying me. He resumed dragging the sack across the lobby, through the door opposite. How could he have known I was watching? I wanted to concentrate on my studies, but turmoil muddied my thoughts once again. Was it a dead hand? Was the man in the graveyard real? I needed solid evidence. By the time my head hit the pillow, I decided I would ascend the stairs the next evening and look inside the sack. I stared at that stamped envelope, thinking of the reasons not to send it. My ideas had been veering from my beliefs. Maybe the real reason I had to quit was that I didn't want my career to start with a paper on the supernatural. What if evidence supports it, though? My coffee-stained cup was empty, so I trudged towards the kitchen, which took me through the lobby. I looked upstairs, and there was the sack. I placed the cup near the door with a quivering hand. First, I opened the front door to the house, leaving it ajar, a quick exit. I walked back to the staircase, and with a pounding heart, I raised myself onto the first step. One table lamp lit the lobby, the only allowance Jack would give, and Richard emphasized that message. I could see Jack's door in the far corner of the gloom. I trod another step, and another. When I asked Richard about Jack's size, he hesitated.
I would say he's fairly big. He would be even bigger if it weren't for his injury.
Injury?
He was in a fight with someone, and his opponent got lucky. He fell down some steps and broke his neck, but survived. His head lies on his shoulder at a funny angle.
It's understandable why the man in the graveyard, given it was him, looked the way he did, especially in the fog. The materialist in me glowed as I felt a supernatural mystery was unraveling. But it did nothing to calm my nerves. Halfway up the stairs now, spider silk looped from the dark chandelier. Jack had given explicit instructions that he didn't want to be disturbed, meaning no cleaners, maintenance crews, or any other visitors above the ground floor. I looked around, and dark corners were everywhere around the landing. His door loomed close. Still silence. Still ingress in case he should burst out of his room. He may have been watching me from any of those black shadows. After suffering his injury, he had lost the power of speech, but it is said he developed strange new abilities. Abilities he used for one purpose, an obsession. He had descended a dark, terrifying path of vengeance. I paused and looked at the bulging sack above and shuddered. It is said he can imbue it with a person's consciousness. Thus, he torments the souls of those he believes have wronged him. The step underneath me creaked. For a long while, I stood, listening. I wanted to go back, but the idea of him mistreating dead bodies forced me to continue. At the top now, I looked around. Indistinct objects hovered on the border of my imagination, and the silence spoke of uneasy calm. The sack lay at my feet, and my legs wobbled as I reached for it. There was the unmistakable crack of a heel, and it wasn't mine. It came from Jack's door. I turned. Standing at the other end of the landing was Jack. I knew it was him because of the lopsided head. His door was open, but no light came from within. The only discrepancy of what I envisioned was his size. He was smaller than me. I recovered from the shock and turned to the sack. Cold, pale hand gripped my wrist. A dead hand. Goosebumps prickled my skin. For an instant, I thought it had come from the sack, but I looked at Jack's face right next to mine and gasped. How did he cover the distance so fast? The next few moments were a blur. I flailed, trying to free myself from his grasp, pushing and striking him. He stumbled back to the banister. His upper body levered over to the other side, and his legs followed. He fell, and after a long pause, I heard a sickening crack of bones far below. He was dead. The inevitability of it was obvious. His body lay still. I looked inside the sack to confirm it was full of potatoes. Then I ran downstairs to inspect Jack's body. I felt for a pulse. There was none. Blood oozed from his head and pooled on the floor. Nothing else I could do. Numbed thought sequences cycled over and over as I sat in the chair. The justified death of a monster, the murder of an innocent man. I saw a dead hand under the door, but there was no dead body in the sack. My rational mind rejected the paranormal evidence of Richard's story. However, many locals believed it. They would believe I had killed a monster and helped cover it up. My conscience would have to deal with it later. Midnight. The endless sequence of thoughts ceased, and I visualized myself inside the sack on top of the stairs, imagining the coarse material touching my face. My face itched, but I couldn't move my arm. The daydream became vivid. I tried to snap out of it, but I couldn't. There was a forceful kick to my back. My innards fluttered as I flew, and my limp body smashed against the hard wooden steps. Pain ripped through my nerves, the pain of a broken nose, dislocated bones, and twisted tendons. The chill of gaping wounds. The visual went back to me as I was in my room, sitting in my chair when I started daydreaming. The pain fading into confused memory. I reached up and felt my face, expecting to see blood on my hands, but to my relief, there was none. The clattering noise continued for a few more seconds, as if the daydream was not finished. Then there were footsteps. But this was no daydream. It was the familiar sound of Jack walking down the stairs again. Now he was dragging the sack across the lobby. Now he was opening, then closing the door opposite. Now silence. I opened my door. Jack's body was gone. So too was the sack. A pool of blood was all that remained. I slept poorly that night and stayed in my room the next day. I packed my belongings, hoping that distance will somehow lessen the pain of another episode. Later, I entertained the idea of a last-ditch attempt at resuming my work, but it was futile. The unsent letter remained on the table. I imagined scenarios that were well beyond what beliefs I held. I imagined the man in the graveyard as a wandering, vengeful spirit. The location where Jack suffered his life-changing injuries near the graveyard. I pictured his lifeless body becoming possessed by that spirit. Maybe he was the real Jack of Hall Manor in life. Maybe some people had wronged him, perhaps even murdered him, hunting down those long-dead spirits and bringing them back to the manor, imprisoning them inside the sack of potatoes, dragging them to that room using the body of the man with the broken neck. Midnight. My hands trembled, but not with anxiety. When Jack's door opened, I strode out into the lobby and folded my arms. I guessed boldness in others was alien to him. He stopped and might have expressed consternation on that dead face. I couldn't tell from where I stood. He continued to walk towards the sack. Sickening doubt stabbed my guts. My implied threat was too subtle, so I made it clear to him. I pointed at the stairs. "You throw me down those stairs." Then I jabbed my finger at him. "I throw you down those stairs, Jack of Spuds." He staggered toward the banister, grabbing the railing. Yes, he knew he wasn't strong enough. I went back to my room, grabbed the envelope, and tore it up. He's since moved out of that mansion, much to the delight of the owner. Richard moved back in, and other students took up temporary residence. Local cleaners and decorators have made the place look warm and inviting again. There have been no new reports of Jack-related nightmares, so it's thought he had died. A dark cloud has lifted from the villagers. I stayed until my thesis was complete, and I've since published many papers, all building on the principle of disembodied consciousness. Gone are the distractions of my student years. I'm driven towards trying to answer the big questions, including the biggest of them all. Does Jack really have power over the dead? There are tales of urns with missing ash and skeletons with unnaturally weathered bones. Further unease comes from not knowing where he lives nowadays. No one has seen him for years. Well, I must confess, I have seen him. In fact, I see him most days. I keep this from the villagers to ensure I remain the only miserable soul among the merry. On those days, I look up from my desk, out the window, across the field, and toward the tree line. And there stands Jack of Hall Manor, reminding me of the terrible fate that awaits me should I not be ready when the time comes. Thank you for listening. You can probably handle another horror story, right?